And we are learning some new information on motions filed ahead of disgraced Low Country attorney Alex Murdaugh's murder trial. That's set to begin in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, Murdaugh is on trial for murders of his wife and son, Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, who were found shot dead on his family's property in June of last year. Here's a breakdown of what has been filed. First, the court has ordered a motion of non-disclosure, prohibiting the release of any identifying information related to the members of the jury. For the duration of the trial, all jurors will be referred to only by juror number. The order will remain unless modified by a second order.
Meanwhile, the state's filed another motion asking the judge to prohibit any evidence brought forth from a polygraph test. The state says any polygraph evidence creates a, quote, high risk of mistrial. The state's asking the court not to allow any evidence from that polygraph or any mention or any reference to that polygraph. And the defense wants to show evidence from a polygraph test. It must first be reviewed and then analyzed by the judge. Finally, Murdaugh's defense team responded to a previous motion from the state to allow evidence of Murdaugh's alleged financial and fraud crimes. The defense argued admitting any evidence pertaining to Murdaugh's alleged financial crimes would, quote, mislead and confuse the jury. The defense further argued the question for the jury is whether Murdaugh killed his wife and son, not whether he committed any financial crimes. The state did respond to the defense team, saying they're only attempting to hide factors that could show Murdaugh had motive. Of course, we'll continue to follow the latest updates on that case and bring them to you.